one of my favorite highlights from Shoein this week.
And I think the defining moment for me was in 1986. I went to Taiwan and I saw them making shoes there. And it was just a real light bulb moment because I saw it and I thought, we just can't compete with this.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Shoein Show. Thank you for joining us for this week's episode. Every Monday, a new episode drops. This is the Footwear Industry's podcast where we talk specifically about the footwear business. There's plenty of great podcasts on design and fashion and sneakers, lots on sneakers. But this is really about the nuts and bolts of the footwear industry and the business side. And so I'm so thrilled today to have one of the industry's legends join me today, Daniel Rubin, based in London. Daniel, welcome to the show. We appreciate you joining.
It's a great pleasure to be with you, Andy.
Yes, I've had the privilege of actually being with Daniel in his offices in London. So this is nice to reconnect in a way, in a virtual setting. But as we kind of go into this, one of the catalysts of this is you've reached your 50th anniversary in the footwear industry, which is a huge milestone. Congratulations. And you've, along the way, I'll share this for the folks who are watching, you've written a book about that journey. And I think it's so important to have this kind of cataloged for the industry and for the general public to understand the footwear industry better, and then the entrepreneurs within the footwear industry. And I think that's one of the things when I was reading through this, Daniel, that really struck me was like how entrepreneurial you are, and the focus around providing value to consumers. That really just struck me when I read this book. And I want to dig into that. But first, I want to give you the chance to talk about Dune as a company, where you are today, who you're serving, what kind of products you guys have.
Yeah, well, that'd be interesting. So, I set up Dune in 1992, so quite a long time ago. We're based in London. 35% of our sales are international. We distribute through multiple channels. Clearly, online is really important for us. It's about 35% of what we do. That's with our partners. We have in the UK 50 shops. Most of those are full price, but some outlet. Internationally, we are big in the Middle East. We have over 60 stores in the Middle East. And I guess the principle when I set up the brand was very much this concept of affordable luxury, that we're making sort of quality shoes. Today, they have to be comfortable quality shoes,
right,
which sell for around $120, $150, but not compromising on the quality at all. We buy from multiple sources around the world. We deal with a comparatively small number of vendors, of suppliers. I guess about eight of the top suppliers supply 80% of what we buy. So we have a very close relationship with them. I mean, I've been, as you say, in the industry for 50 years. I started off as a manufacturer for 10 years. And then I was an importer, bringing in mainly from the Far East. And as I say, in 1992, I set up Dune. I guess the book is very much around change. Manufacturing, I used to be a manufacturer, but it was very clear that, manufacturing was going to leave the UK and move to the Far East. That was a big change. And it took me a long time, maybe too long, to recognize that change was happening. I guess the second big change was when I set up Dune, because we were supplying a lot of the multiple retailers with footwear, but we didn't have a brand. And we found that margins were getting squeezed further and further. And so that was really the sort of catalyst that made us set up Dune, because we wanted a brand. We wanted to establish a brand. At the time, a lot of the specialist shoe retailers were closing down, but they tended to be at the lower end of the market. And so we very much wanted to have a quality product, appealing to a fashionable woman. I guess we're not leading fashion. We're not, it's very accessible fashion.
Right.
But that's been the principle all the way through. And I guess where we are now is that we very much are in the process of becoming more of a global footwear and accessories brand. As I say, we have big distribution in the Middle East. We're in 30 countries around the world through franchise, different models. We are growing gradually our business in the States, which is super important for us. So it's an exciting time for the brand. We really think there are opportunities out there. A lot of our competitors have closed down. Mm-hmm. It's a very tough market out there, very competitive. But we feel that we have now the confidence, the identity, in order to really see substantial growth over the next few years.
Yeah. So let me say that. So again, Daniel's book is Soul Survivor. In the States, you can get it on Barnes and Noble. I think anywhere at this point you can find it on Amazon. Whether that's good or not, I don't know. But you can find it on Amazon, and I think and most booksellers in the UK and elsewhere also have this. I thought it was a really good page turner, Daniel. Where I want to start with the question of your journey in 50 years was your dad said, "Don't do it." Your dad said, "Don't work in footwear."
No, he was. He wanted me to be an accountant,
right?
And I was bad at maths. I really was. But in those days, you listened to what your dad said, and I did become an accountant. I spent 3-4 years qualifying, and remain as an accountant because, as you say, he always said, manufacturing's not easy. So I was in banking, I was in a demolition company. And then my father I was getting to 30 years old. My father wasn't that well. And so I decided that demolition wasn't for me. So I went to join him. And, I stayed, that was in 1976. And 50 years later, I'm still here.
Still here.
But I think his advice, there's, and, the shoe business is tough. It's difficult, isn't it? The stock you have to hold, the lead times, taking up a third of the store with stock. It's a difficult industry. But having said that, I found it massively enjoyable. I've met some great people, built some good relationships, and it's a great product. Even though I'm an accountant, my passion is all about the product. I love the product. It's architectural, it's interesting, it's constantly evolving. So that's how I got into the industry.
Yeah.
But
I'll tell you this. I love the opening pages. The opening pages focus on the difficulties of the product, and you do so well to explain how it's not clothing, right? How much more difficult it is than clothing. It can't be a millimeter off, whether you feel it. You have to have more stock sizes. The performance is different. The needs different. I thought as soon as I started reading that, I was like, oh, this is going to be a good book. Like, this is what we've been talking about for so long, to retailers, to policymakers on regulations, to all these different things about how unique of a product it is. But I also thought, in some ways, your story is very unique. And in other ways, I was reading it and I was like, I've broken down in China before on the roadway. You talk about breaking down and being in the pouring rain. I've broken down in China before as well. So those sourcing stories, you kind of see. What I thought was unique was, so now you have 4 generations of your family. You got a bookend of your grandfather. And then now I think your family, I saw where your daughter was actually collaborating with Dune on some designs and some product.
But it's the shoe trade though.
Yeah, exactly. But your grandfather arrives penniless in London, being tricked, thinking he was going to America. So
that's right.
We might have a different conversation. You might have a different accent if things had gone differently when we're talking at this point. But I thought it was fascinating. And then as an immigrant, he arrives in the UK and gets into the shoe trade. How does that happen?
Well, I think his father was a cobbler. He came from Vilnius, and Vilnius is now the capital of Lithuania. Yeah. In those days, it was part of Russia. And I think my great-grandfather was a cobbler in the countryside somewhere, making handmade shoes.
Yeah.
It was a time that was really tough, especially for the Jews. There were a lot of sort of pogroms and sort of persecution, and the economy was really bad. And his brother had emigrated to America. He was living in New York. And so he managed to get together the money. He traveled across the country, got on a boat. And when he got to his destination, the captain said, you've got here. That's it. Get off. I mean, the conditions on the boat were terrible. In those days, you were stuck because he didn't have a passport. He was stuck in the hold. But anyway, he arrived in London, and he didn't know he was in London. He thought he was in New York. He got off the boat looking for his brother, but he wasn't to be seen because instead of New York, he'd been tricked by the captain, and he was in London. And he was in London penniless. He had one German mark in his pocket, and he didn't know what to do. It was really difficult. And in the end, he did have the name of a family he knew from the old country. And he managed to contact them, and he worked. He slept on his bench in the evening because he didn't have anywhere to live. He did the cleaning. Eventually, he got promoted and started making shoes. It was, this is in the 1900s, so it was a tough time. And eventually, he did manage to start a small slipper factory in his apartment. He had one room, and in the room he was making slippers. And then the breakthrough came. The breakthrough came from two reasons. First of all, he had a very pushy wife, and his wife sort of said, Morris, this isn't good enough. You need to start your own business. And in 1925, he set up a business, M. Rubin and Sons, making ladies' fashion shoes with his two elder sons. My father was the youngest of seven. And he was a violinist. He played in an orchestra. But that's how he started. But it was really fascinating, researching for the book, the conditions then. And we complain about things today, but back then it was really, really tough. And it was an interesting story. And I think it's a story that resonates with lots of different people. I think there were lots of immigrants at that time, leaving Russia, leaving Eastern Europe and going to Europe, and in particular to the States.
I think reading that, I think, is really important in today's era of populism. And it may not everybody's anti-immigrant, but there seems to be a trend line of that across Western Europe and in the US. And these stories are really important to understand how our modern economy is built and the contributions that immigrants do have to society. And I thought it was just a really fascinating kind of story that is the starting point for Dune, really. It's like, you could call it a rags to riches story, but you actually need the rags because your grandfather shows up penniless with nothing and then, builds it from there. And I think it's just a great starting point. And then knowing you've been in the business for so long, and then you've got children who are working in fashion and have worked with Dune in that way. What was also really fascinating is you're one of the few people who, and there's fewer and fewer of these folks, unfortunately, but have manufactured footwear, have imported and been all over the world looking for sourcing options, have worked in retail, have started a brand, and now own your own retail shops. You've kind of done everything in footwear, right? Like from making the shoe to stocking it to, you talk in the book about being on the floor to talk to your customers, which I think is really important. And one kind of string through this, well, there's several, but just the persistence of you trying to make a success of it and adding value. And I think the other part is just your agility. Like you were saying, like I was staying in a little bit too long, but there were people who stayed in it to the point where they had to shut down. You got out a little bit earlier than they did in some instances. But how do you, when those changes were occurring, both societal and from a product side, how did you identify when those changes were happening and you needed to get out?
I think, the manufacturing business was getting more and more difficult. Initially, it was interesting when you went to see customers, some of the retailers, they saw you really quickly. They liked the product. And gradually, first of all, the Italians were coming in, and then the Brazilians, and then the Far East. And you were down the pecking order because they could place a lot of those shoes much cheaper in these other countries. And I think, business was getting more and more difficult. The orders were getting smaller. They wanted more flexibility in terms of last. When you put a last down, to change the last in the middle of production is not easy. But we were having to do that quite frequently. So the whole manufacturing process was getting much more complicated. And I think the defining moment for me was in 1986. I went to Taiwan, and I saw them making shoes there. And it was just a real light bulb moment, because I saw it and I thought, we just can't compete with this. And it wasn't as if the quality wasn't as good. The quality was good. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't, we had some very temperamental operators on the shop floor, people from all over Europe coming in and, they're throwing lasts around and one thing or another. You went there, it was very disciplined. And I think I was just struck by the quality and the consistency. So at the time I had a partner, I came back and I said to him, Len, we just can't continue with this. It's going to come to an end. He was a lovely guy, but he was a manufacturer through and through, and he continued for another 2 or 3 years until he finally closed it down. But I think we just didn't have a choice at that stage. It was so obvious that shoe manufacturing was going to leave the UK. And we were in London, and London was even more expensive than some of the other areas in the UK. So, we just had to get out of it. And, I at that stage, I had a decision. Do I stay in footwear or do I try something else? A lot of my friends went into property or finance.
Right.
I stayed in footwear and started importing. And I must say that's mostly the most enjoyable part, because I was traveling all around the world. China at the time, it was Taiwan, but then it moved briefly to Indonesia. And we went to the Philippines, we went to Vietnam, and finally we ended up in China. So that was really interesting, going all around those places at an early stage of China was just opening up at that stage. So you felt like a bit of a pioneer going into China in those days. But it was fascinating.
Yeah, you were talking about the roads weren't really built, like the conditions. You were writing at one point where you had eaten something you probably shouldn't have, which same with me. Didn't know exactly what I was eating. I wish somebody had told me, but didn't. But I think a lot of those stories kind of resonate, I think, with footwear people who have been to factories and sourcing locations like that even today. But the relationships you talk about in here, I would say there's several things I read about this. One is you're very good at being opportunistic and seeing what's changing and trying to make the change with it. You're really focused on quality. So your product today is unbelievably high quality. There are several times in your book where somebody was saying, if you make these changes, you could save 50 pence, $1, whatever. And you were like, we can't compromise on the quality, because that's what we're all about. But the other one really for me, to me, Daniel, and I'm just speaking, having someone who read this and a fan of the book, is it's kind of a love letter to everybody you've worked with. It's an acknowledgement letter. Like, you really go deep into, you don't claim any wins on your own. You're giving credit to all the people you've worked with over all these years. And it speaks a lot to your character, I think, and to the fact that Dune's still going and growing, of what you built, kind of a culture at the company. And I doubt you would say this because you're a humble person, but I think it's a really lovely book about all these people and relationships you built along the way, and really enjoyable.
Well, that's very kind, Andy. Look, I think the relationships are just so important. When we really found that out was during the pandemic.
Yeah.
During the pandemic, it was tough. We were making dressy type shoes generally. Everybody was wearing trainers or slippers at home. And we had such fantastic support from our suppliers. And I think that support was mainly based on relationship. I'd known these people for a long, long time, and they trusted me and I trusted them, and they understood my problems and I understood their problems. And together we managed to get through it. And I think that really defined for me the importance of relationships. It's not a transactional thing. Right. It's about understanding people. And it makes a massive difference, I think, but also it's hugely pleasurable. I mentioned the book, meeting people, going out to eat, talking about food. They like talking about, the men like talking about football, but everybody likes talking about food and, experiencing the different food in the different countries, in Vietnam, in India, in Brazil, in Italy. I mean, that was fascinating. So yeah, that was a really enjoyable time. And I think it was a great opportunity to meet some really, really nice, inspiring people. I think the thing about footwear is it's tough. And I think it does breed a group of people that are resilient, that really do sort of put their heart and soul into making those shoes. I remember going to factories in Italy, 9 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock at night, they're still there. They're still making those samples. They're still, improving the shoes. And I think it's that dedication to making the product really good, which I found really fascinating and enjoyable.
Yeah. And as people read this, they'll learn more about all of this in detail about your pathway to where you are today with Dune. But there was a decision you had to make that you talked about in the book where you were an importer, your margins were getting smaller, you had more competition. And the story is the same today, right? Different eras, same story from a lot of people. But you realized you had to make a brand. You create the brand Dune because of the shifting sands that you so eloquently were talking about, and from manufacturing to importing, and then all these changes that were happening in retail, consumer behavior shifts, etc. What was it? How difficult was it to move into branding from just typical importing?
I mean, we kept on with the importing for some years. We continued that until 2009, and I started Dune in 1992. And to be honest, the importing was funding a lot of the initial growth of Dune. We grew slowly. We were originally in concessions in a department, in a clothing store. Then we opened the first store, and then the second store a year later. It was only really after 3 or 4 years that we really started to get the confidence to open more stores. So we didn't, it wasn't a huge, great bang. It was a more gradual, sort of organic sort of move. Yeah. Because as the retail was getting more interesting and exciting and making more money, and the importing was doing worse, my attention shifted totally to the brand, because I just found it really exciting, that whole, creating a brand, doing the shop design, doing the footwear, so that was really important. And the biggest point that we actually was interesting, in 2009, we tripled our size. So we were a £50 million, about a sort of $70 million business. And we took over this company. It was in administration. It was in Chapter 11, and we bought it for a very, very good price. And our sales went from $70 million to $200 million. And that was transformational. It was interesting because they mainly had shop-in-shops within department stores. And it was hugely profitable. And it was a fantastic move. And we bought the business at a really good price. The problem was that 10 years down the line, the department stores were really struggling. As they have been all over the world. And so what was a great strength in having all those shop-in-shops in department stores suddenly became a weakness. So we had to really repivot the business to focus very much on the stores or on online, and building different types of partnerships, building partnerships with some of the department stores internationally, but also with people in the UK that just sold shoes. Yeah. I mean, that's the other major change, is that the shoe specialists have declined, and now everybody is selling shoes.
Right. And everybody's a quasi retailer with online, right?
Exactly. Whether it's on a rack underneath the clothing or whatever, you can buy shoes everywhere. And that's been the other big change, I think. One is the manufacturing, but the other is the demise of a lot of the specialist retailers, especially at the lower price in the market, that just couldn't compete with the department stores or the general stores that were selling footwear.
Yeah, I like the fact that when you're talking about your story, you're intertwining your business knowledge into this, because you could see that's why I think it's a really good personal narrative and acknowledgement of all the people you've worked with. I think it's wonderful, but also for me, picking up a lot of things, right? I'm watching, as specifically about the brand, because you balance the decisions, right? You still were an importer. helping fund the brand. You just didn't go for a loan and sell your equity. You talk a lot about that in the book. Don't sell the equity early if you're trying to build something, right? So you have these little kind of nuances throughout the book. You also, I think, don't shy away from the fact that you made some mistakes with retail. So you made some mistakes in the US, you made it overseas, and what I thought was really interesting, you were talking about like in the Middle East, like you missed the product because the climate was different than it was, maybe in China, where they were just a different kind of culture, a different thing, and how you learn from that. And I think you're now starting to grow significantly in the U.S. And I'm just wondering, you mentioned setting up a store in New York and just missing kind of the je ne sais quoi of pushing into the market. And I'm wondering now, all that knowledge, and I think people reading this will appreciate the fact that you keep coming back, right? You keep getting up and moving on. But I got to think it makes your business stronger when you start to realize all these things and the nuances to make the product better and place better.
I think that's right. I mean, one thing I have discovered, certainly shoe stores are difficult. The economics, especially somewhere like the UK where rents are high, but we also have what's called a rating system, which adds another 50% onto the occupation costs. So, it isn't easy being a specialist shoe retailer and make a lot of money. We make more money, I think, mostly out of our outlet stores than we do out of our full price stores. So stores are difficult. I think we need stores, definitely. But our strategy is very much is to go for really good stores in high footfall locations. So they really are sort of adverts for the brand. So I think that has very much changed. I suppose if I had to recall one of the biggest mistakes, it's certainly opening stores maybe, too quickly in the wrong locations. And that is expensive. Yeah. I think I've learned that lesson. So going into the States, we won't be rushing to open a store. We're certainly working much more on a wholesale model, on a marketplace dropship model, on our own website. So I think we certainly won't be opening stores anytime soon. And if we do, I think there'll be flagship stores. I think there'll be more, to really get the full sort of width of the brand and sort of make a brand statement out of the stores.
Yeah.
I won't be opening many stores quickly because, they are difficult. I think you just need to be more selective. In the past, I thought I did my homework. I thought I did my due diligence, but you never really know. And, I think now, especially with online and different places you can buy footwear, I think stores are difficult. I don't know whether it's the same in the States. I'm sure there are retailers doing really well on footwear stores, but for us, the growth is less about stores, more about partnerships, about online concessions, different type of models. And I think that's the point that really I try to get across in the book is the complexity now. When I started in 1992, it was easy. There was one store, and everybody went to stores. They were packed because they couldn't buy anywhere else. Right. Now the choice that consumer has is so wide in terms of where you can buy your shoes that it's put pressure on stores.
Well, you guys have a good business with Nordstrom and several good partners in the U.S. You're more and more showing at Fanny. So you're showing up to the market. People know more and more in the U.S. about Dune, both in the industry, but also consumers. So it seems like whatever your strategy is to deploy in the state side is working pretty well so far.
It is. I think the encouraging thing is the sell-through of our product is really, really strong. We're seeing massive increases there, which is very encouraging because, it gives us the confidence if the stock that we're supplying is actually selling. I think we've still got a long way to go. I think marketing is hugely important. We've been very successful with celebrity endorsement of our product, having people like Katie Holmes or Jennifer Aniston wearing our product has really helped raise our profile in the States. The unfortunate thing is sometimes we haven't had enough stock in market to really maximize on the sales, but hopefully we're in the process of dealing with that. But yeah, no, we have a good team in the States. We're really committed to it. We're going to all the fanny fairs, definitely. So yeah, it's a hugely competitive market, but it's 10 times the size of the UK. It's doing really well. There may be lots of hiccups on the way, but if you look at how the States is performing compared to the UK and Europe, is performing really well. So it's a very, very dynamic market. And it's certainly very near the top of our list of where we want to grow. As you say, we had a difficult experience about sort of 8 years ago where we got it wrong. I think we've learned a lot of those lessons. And I think now as a brand, we're in a much better position to really sort of to take advantage of where we are.
Yeah. So tell me today, you have for several years now, you've had a full-time CEO. You're still very involved in the business. How often are you coming into the office? Are you still in the meetings, the line meetings, looking at the product? I know you are.
Yeah, no, I gave up being, I was CEO during the pandemic, which was really fascinating. I mean, one of the good things about having a lot of experience, at least you've seen lots of things like that. And it was tough, but it was really interesting and challenging. But funnily enough, I enjoyed it. As a team, we worked very, very closely together. But Nigel joined us. He's our CEO. Nigel Darwin joined us 3 years ago. And I have stepped back. I mean, I'm still, mostly get on everybody's nerves by saying, why is everything taking so long? When you're not involved day to day, you want things to happen quickly. And sometimes that's unreasonable. But I do come in twice a week. I do go to all of the product reviews. I'm not so good at deciding what the new thing is. I'm quite good at knowing what isn't going to sell.
That could be very valuable too. That's very valuable.
It is, and sometimes they listen to me. So yeah, so I really enjoy. I mean, as I say, I'm passionate about the product. I really love the product. I still go around stores, photographing windows. So yeah, the product really drives me on, but also the brand side. The brand is really interesting. These days you can't really be successful unless you have a strong brand. And so getting that identity, deciding how we market ourselves is just very important. So those are the two sides I'm most involved with. Apart from overall strategy, it's the marketing side and the product.
Yeah. Let me ask you about that. And we'll wrap up. I know you're very busy. But in the book, I wonder if this is still the case. You had 3 consumers you talked about. You gave them names. It was like Sally. There was a couple of names, and it was like, someone who occasionally shops Dune, someone who always shops Dune, someone who, sporadically, etc. Like, is that still the case? Are you still categorizing that way and talking about? I just thought it was creative that you guys find a name.
We did. That was a little while ago. We had sort of Sally was the entry price. She bought during sale time, but she aspired to buy Dune, but maybe bought a cheaper brand. Our core customer, she likes fashion. She's not fashion forward necessarily, but she really likes fashion. And then the Amber, who was our fashion forward customer, who only popped into Dune when we had something that was really special. I think there is a similarity today. I think today maybe it's more complicated. I think, we do a lot of men's shoes as well as women's, and I think the profile there is slightly different. But yeah, look, being in touch with the customer is absolutely critical, and understanding the customer. And I think we do, especially through our retail team, who are really valuable in terms of feeding back information around our customer. And of course, online, it's much easier to get information. And now with AI as well, you can profile your customers much more accurately. You can personalize the offer you give to them much better, much more relevant. So yeah, it is all about the customer.
Yeah.
And, I think, one of the things we need to do, and I think always need to do, is sort of listen to the customer, get feedback from them so that we're constantly giving them what they want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, 50 years on from where you were, now we're talking about AI. but it still goes back to that customer, doesn't it? And the product.
I think that's right. I think the basics of having a great product, really good customer service, and a really great environment, whatever changes there may be in technology,
right.
Those are sort of fundamentals that just won't change.
Yeah.
If you go into a store and you get bad customer service, you won't go back.
True.
If you go into a store and you really don't like the product, you won't go back. So, you may have all the AI tools that are available, but if those fundamentals aren't in place, I think you're going to struggle to be successful.
Yeah, and I think in the book you mentioned that you're like, don't overcomplicate business sometimes, right? Like that's a key thing that you talked about is like, we can overcomplicate it. We can have all the data, we can have these charts, we can do all this, but it does go down to product and people in many ways.
I think it does. Look, maybe I'm sort of behind the curve on the technology side. There's no doubt that AI is making massive differences throughout the business. But, I think there is sometimes the danger of, as you say, of overcomplicating and saying, if you don't have the product right, you're dead in the water. You've just got no chance. And the number of businesses I've seen that haven't been successful is because maybe the people that were involved in the product has left, as private equity has come in.
Yeah.
Most of the people I know that have been successful are still around. And there are a lot of them in the States. They are product people. They really are passionate about the product. So for me, that is the number one priority. Obviously the customer, but it's getting that product right is absolutely crucial.
Yeah. Well, Daniel, Soul Survivor, a wonderful book. It was a fascinating read. Again, I think people from the industry, when you read it, you'll have the stories may be a little bit different, but the thread is very similar for a lot of folks in the industry. I think of going overseas and creating an import business, dealing with retail today. You talk about COVID. I know Brexit was really tough, and the conditions from that. So like, I think the external impacts may be increasing in speed. But you talked about all these different shifts and changes. And I think it's just a really good book about being agile and opportunistic and focused on quality and the customer.
I think you're absolutely right about the external factors. In the UK, we did have Brexit, but there's the wars, affected our shipping. There was the financial crisis back in 2009 where, the pound sunk against the dollar. I think it's been those external factors that have made business people have to be really resilient now, and react to external factors that have been bigger. I think, the tariffs, who expected that? I mean, you've had to rethink maybe some of your sourcing. So I think that is the biggest unknown, isn't it? And it's, as I say, you've just got to be prepared to respond to it.
Yeah.
And be agile, as you say, as well.
Yeah. Sometimes I think it's the attitude as much as the business, strategy, of having the right attitude to say, we'll bounce back. And you talk a lot about that in the book. There were a lot of challenges you had, but you're constantly bouncing back.
Yes.
But again, Soul Survivor is the book. Daniel Rubin, founder of Dune. You can find Dune in the U.S. at Nordstrom stores, online. Just type in Dune and take a look. Their Instagram feed is beautiful. They have really great visuals, really good branding, really great product, growing product. For folks in the industry who will be coming into Fannie Market Week in June, August, and December, I think you'll probably be showing all three or at least several of those.
Definitely. Super important. Yeah.
So you'll be able to meet their team there. And I would encourage you to stop by and just take a look at their product and see what it is, because I think people will be quite pleased. And as Daniel said, sell-through in the U.S. is going really well for them because they're doing everything for the right reason based on quality and the consumer. But Daniel, thanks for taking the time. I'll say this. I don't get a chance to read many books anymore because I got 3 small kids, but I carved the time out because of my respect for you and like the great conversations we had when we were in London. And I was rewarded with a really, really interesting tale and some key insights that I'm going to use on the business side. So I really appreciate it.
Well, that's very kind, Andy. I really appreciate that. That's a very good endorsement. I couldn't ask for more.
All right, folks. Well, thanks for listening to this week's Shoe and Show with Daniel Rubin, industry legend. Every Monday, new Shoe and Show drops. I'll encourage people to go to shoeandshow.com for our full catalog. And this is something, we did a series last year, a Shoe Leader series, that this would fit really nicely into as well, about how business leaders think about and strategize and their attitudes around business, around product, around process, around people. All three things really important. And we hope that as you listen to Shoe and Show, you pick up some of the same kind of tidbits that we pick up internally. These shows help me more than anyone to understand business a little bit better. But that's really what this podcast is about, is how can we strengthen the footwear industry and make us a better, stronger, more unified industry. We appreciate you listening. We appreciate Daniel chiming in today from London. Wish him all the best. And until next time, Shoe-In is out.
Shoe-In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.